Have you ever wondered what recipes once ruled American kitchens, but then vanished without a trace? Hidden inside old Betty Crocker cookbooks are dishes that once brought families together, filled Sunday tables, and even made ordinary nights feel special. Yet today, most are long forgotten. This video will take you back to that golden age of home cooking, when recipes weren't just about food, they were about tradition, creativity, and togetherness. Some of these dishes are comforting, some are quirky, and a few might make you laugh out loud. But every one of them tells a story about the time it came from, the post-war 40s, the colorful 50s, and the bold experiments of the 70s. From casseroles that stretched a single pound of meat to desserts shaped like crowns and even candles, these meals captured the imagination of families across America. And now, it's time to bring them back into the spotlight. So if you love nostalgia, history, and a taste of the past, make sure to subscribe, because today, we're diving into 12 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes you need to see. Eggs a la goldenrod. When money was tight and ingredients were scarce, one recipe stood out as both elegant and practical: eggs a la goldenrod. Though the name sounds fancy, it was really a Depressions and wartime-era staple that Betty Crocker kept alive in her cookbooks for decades. Families loved it because it took one of the cheapest ingredients, eggs, and transformed them into something that felt comforting and almost celebratory. The dish began with simple hard-boiled eggs. The whites were chopped up and folded into a creamy white sauce, made with butter, milk, and flour, ingredients most households usually had on hand. This mixture was then spooned generously over toasted bread, creating a warm, hearty base. But the finishing touch gave the recipe its goldenrod name. The bright yellow yolks were pressed through a sieve and sprinkled on top, looking like a blanket of golden blossoms. It wasn't just food, it was an act of resourcefulness. Mothers could feed their families with just a few eggs, stretching them into a filling meal that felt more special than it really cost. Kids often remembered the golden topping with nostalgia, associating it with cozy kitchens and the smell of fresh toast on chilly mornings. While today it might sound old-fashioned, eggs a la goldenrod reflects a time when creativity in the kitchen meant survival, and when even the humblest foods carried love, warmth, and ingenuity. Salmon sandwich bake. In the 1970s, Betty Crocker had a way of taking the simplest pantry staples and turning them into something that looked and felt like a feast. One quirky favorite that appeared in her cookbooks was the salmon sandwich bake. It wasn't just dinner, it was a casserole disguised as comfort food, perfect for weeknights when families wanted something filling without spending much. The idea was simple: take canned salmon, cheap, convenient, and packed with protein, and layer it with slices of sandwich bread. The bread acted like a crust, soaking up a creamy mixture of milk, eggs, onions, and seasonings. Sometimes peas or celery were added for color, giving it that classic 70s casserole look. Once baked, the dish puffed up into a golden, savory pie that was as frugal as it was hearty. For many households, canned salmon was an affordable alternative to meat, and Betty Crocker turned it into something that felt homemade and special. The dish carried a touch of elegance, even if it was made from items pulled straight from the pantry shelf. Families remembered gathering around the table as the smell of warm salmon and toasty bread drifted through the kitchen, a reminder that you didn't need steak or roast beef to feel full. While you don't see salmon sandwich bake on dinner tables anymore, it stands as a snapshot of its time and an era when casseroles reigned supreme, creativity stretched every dollar, and a humble can of salmon could transform into the centerpiece of a family meal. Turkey dressing bake. Long before microwaves and prepackaged frozen meals, leftovers were the true secret weapon of the American kitchen. And in Betty Crocker's world, no leftover was more valuable than turkey. Out of this mindset came a recipe that turned post-holiday scraps into a hearty, comforting dish: turkey dressing bake. Think of it as Thanksgiving, neatly packed into a casserole dish. Families would take chunks of leftover turkey, mix them with stuffing, and bind it all together with a creamy sauce or a little gravy. Betty Crocker's version often led the turkey and dressing like a pie, then baked it until the top turned golden and crisp. The result was a dish that stretched holiday flavors into the days that followed, without feeling like reheated leftovers. For many American families in the 1950s and 60s, this was more than just thriftiness. It was a way to honor the food they had, making every bite count in an era when waste was frowned upon. Mothers saw it as both economical and practical, but kids remembered it as the cozy taste of Thanksgiving lingering just a little longer. The turkey dressing bake wasn't flashy or elegant, but it captured the spirit of mid-century cooking: resourceful, family-centered, and deeply rooted in tradition. Today, it's largely forgotten, but in its time, it was a dish that could turn one turkey into a week's worth of warm, filling dinners. Crown cake. In the bright, cheerful kitchens of the 1970s, desserts weren't just sweet treats, they were a statement. And one of Betty Crocker's most eye-catching creations was the crown cake. True to its name, this dessert was baked to look like a jewel sitting on the family table, perfect for birthdays, church gatherings, or Sunday dinners where presentation mattered as much as taste. The cake itself was a moist, golden sponge, often baked in a ring or bundt pan to mimic the shape of a crown. Once cooled, it was draped in a rich glaze and decorated with colorful candied fruits or nuts, sparkling like little gems pressed into the frosting. For families in the 70s, when food trends leaned toward fun and festive, crown cake was a centerpiece dessert that turned any meal into a celebration. But it wasn't just about looks. The flavors were warm and nostalgic: vanilla, almond, sometimes a hint of spice, making every bite feel both comforting and indulgent. For many children, this cake meant excitement. It appeared at special gatherings and seemed almost too pretty to slice. Betty Crocker's crown cake reflected the era's love of showstopper desserts, when baking was not only about feeding the family but also about dazzling them. While it's rarely seen today, this golden-ringed cake still shines in memory as a symbol of the creativity and joy that once ruled America's kitchens. Sombrero pie. In the 1960s and 70s, American kitchens were buzzing with curiosity about international flavors. Betty Crocker tapped into that trend with a playful and eye-catching dish called sombrero pie. It wasn't truly Mexican cuisine, but rather a fun, Americanized version that gave families the sense of something exotic, without leaving the comfort of home. The pie began with a savory meat base, usually ground beef or turkey, seasoned with chili powder, onions, and sometimes a touch of canned tomatoes. This filling was poured into a pie plate and topped with layers of cheese, olives, and vegetables, arranged in a circular pattern to resemble the brim of a sombrero. At the very center sat a mound of sour cream or salsa, creating the crown of the hat. To families of the time, this dish felt festive, colorful, and different from the usual casseroles. Kids especially loved the playful presentation, while parents appreciated how affordable and easy it was to make. It was the kind of recipe that might show up at a potluck or family gathering, drawing laughs and admiration before the first slice was even served. Sombrero pie reflected an era when Betty Crocker encouraged homemakers to be adventurous, to experiment with foreign inspiration, and to turn dinner into something fun. Today, it's nearly forgotten, but in its heyday, it was both a conversation starter and a comfort food all in one. Raw fries. Sometimes the simplest recipes are the ones that linger longest in memory. Betty Crocker's raw fries, a dish that first appeared in mid-century cookbooks, was proof that comfort didn't have to be complicated. While the name might sound odd today, these weren't raw at all. Instead, they were thinly sliced potatoes fried fresh in a skillet until golden and crisp, a kind of homemade version of hash browns that families adored. The recipe began with humble potatoes, peeled and shaved into paper-thin slices. Instead of parboiling or pre-cooking them, the raw slices went straight into a hot pan with a little butter or bacon drippings. Sprinkled with salt and pepper, they cooked slowly, developing a browned, crispy edge while staying soft and tender at the center. Raw fries were a favorite for breakfast alongside eggs, or as a hearty side dish at supper when meat and vegetables needed a filling partner. Because potatoes were cheap and abundant, this dish quickly became a go-to for stretching meals during tight times. And unlike fancy casseroles, it didn't require any special ingredients, just a skillet, a stove, and a little patience. Families remembered raw fries for their simplicity, the crackle of the pan, the smell of frying potatoes, the way everyone reached for seconds before the plate was empty. In many ways, this dish represented the heart of Betty Crocker's cooking philosophy, turning the ordinary into something comforting and memorable. Today, they've been replaced by frozen hash browns and fast food fries, but raw fries remain a charming reminder of the era when home kitchens ran on thrift, creativity, and the magic of a skillet. Cereal Christmas trees. For many families in the 1970s, Christmas wasn't complete without a little Betty Crocker magic, and one of her most whimsical holiday creations was cereal Christmas trees. These weren't elaborate cakes or fancy cookies, but playful, colorful treats that captured the spirit of the season in the simplest way possible. The recipe was built on a base everyone knew, puffed rice cereal bound together with melted marshmallows and butter. Instead of pressing the mixture into squares, Betty encouraged homemakers to shape it by hand into small cones, forming miniature Christmas trees. Once molded, the fun really began. Kids and parents decorated the trees with gumdrops, sprinkles, or tiny candies, each piece looking like a tree sparkling with ornaments. Part of the charm was how interactive the recipe was. Families gathered in the kitchen, rolling, shaping, and decorating together. For children, it was pure holiday joy, sticky fingers, bright candies, and the pride of creating something that could sit proudly on the dessert table. For parents, it was a thrifty way to add festivity without needing expensive ingredients or hours of baking. These edible trees were more than just sweets, they were memory makers. They turned the kitchen into a workshop of laughter and holiday tradition, where creativity mattered more than perfection. Though you won't find cereal Christmas trees in modern Betty Crocker collections, they stand as a snapshot of the playful, hands-on spirit of the 70s. A dessert you could build, decorate, and eat. What more could a kid ask for at Christmas time? Jellied chicken salad. If there's one recipe that perfectly captures the quirks of mid-century American cooking, it's jellied chicken salad. Popular in the 1950s and 60s, this dish was Betty Crocker's answer to the era's obsession with gelatin molds, when nearly every party table featured something shimmering and jiggling under the light. The recipe combined shredded cooked chicken with mayonnaise, celery, onions, and sometimes olives or pimentos. Instead of serving it on bread or lettuce, the mixture was suspended in a clear lemon or savory gelatin, then molded into a loaf or ring. Sliced and served cold, it was often presented on a bed of greens, its glossy surface decorated with parsley or hard-boiled egg slices. To modern eyes, it might seem unusual, even unappetizing, but at the time, Jellied salads represented elegance and creativity. They were seen as a way to impress guests with something that looked elaborate, even if the ingredients were inexpensive and practical. For hostesses of the day, it was the ultimate company dish, offering a blend of thrift, convenience, and mid-century style. Families remembered it as the kind of recipe that showed up at church potlucks, bridal showers, or Sunday luncheons. While kids often poked at the jiggling slices with giggles, adults admired the colorful presentation and the novelty of eating salad in sliceable form. Though Jellied chicken salad has vanished from today's tables, it remains a fascinating glimpse into a time when gelatin wasn't just dessert, it was a canvas for creativity, and even a way to turn simple chicken into a showpiece. Savory surprises. In the playful kitchens of the 1970s, Betty Crocker wasn't just about casseroles and cakes, she loved recipes with a twist. One of the most curious creations was a party appetizer called Savory Surprises. Just as the name promised, these little pastries came with a hidden filling that made every bite a small adventure. The base was a simple pastry dough, rolled thin and cut into small circles or squares. Inside, homemakers tucked flavorful fillings, sometimes cheese and ham, sometimes mushrooms, sometimes even spiced ground beef. Each piece was carefully folded and sealed, then baked until golden and flaky. Guests never knew what they were going to get until they took that first bite, hence the surprise. They were perfect for cocktail parties, potlucks, or family gatherings, when finger foods were the highlight of the table. For children, they were like edible presents. For adults, they were an easy yet elegant way to serve something memorable without breaking the budget. Part of the fun was in the variety. A tray of savory surprises could hold a dozen different fillings, making them a conversation piece as much as a snack. And while they've largely disappeared from modern cookbooks, their spirit lives on in today's bite-sized party foods. Back then, though, Betty Crocker's savory surprises weren't just appetizers, they were a reminder that food could be playful, social, and just a little mysterious. Finska kaka. Among the many treasures tucked into Betty Crocker's holiday collections was a delicate Scandinavian cookie with a name that sounded exotic to American ears, Finska kaka. Known as Finnish cookies, these little treats carried an old-world charm that fit perfectly into Christmas traditions of the 1950s and 60s. The recipe was simple but elegant. A buttery dough, rich with sugar, vanilla, and egg yolks, was rolled into small crescents or rounds. Before baking, the cookies were brushed with beaten egg and sprinkled generously with chopped nuts, usually almonds or walnuts. When they came out of the oven, they had a golden, crisp shell with a tender, melt-in-your-mouth center. What made them special wasn't just the flavor, but the feeling. Finska kaka weren't everyday cookies, they were holiday cookies, the kind that appeared only once a year, often passed around on platters alongside spritz and gingerbread. Families remembered the warm, nutty aroma filling the kitchen, and kids loved sneaking them off cooling racks before they reached the table. For Betty Crocker, including recipes like this was her way of bringing a world of baking to American homes. In an era when travel abroad was rare, these cookies gave homemakers a taste of something foreign yet festive, adding a touch of sophistication to the holiday spread. Though they've slipped out of modern memory, Finska kaka remain a reminder of how mid-century baking blended tradition, nostalgia, and a dash of international flair. One bite, and it felt like Christmas had truly arrived. Prune whip pie. In the 1940s and 50s, desserts weren't always about indulgence, they were often about making the most of what you had. One forgotten Betty Crocker recipe that embodied this thrifty creativity was prune whip pie. While the name may not sound glamorous today, in its time it was considered both elegant and practical, the kind of dessert a resourceful homemaker could proudly serve to guests. The filling started with stewed prunes, sweetened and whipped into a light, airy mixture with beaten egg whites. The result was a fluffy, almost mousse-like texture, sweet but not heavy. Poured into a flaky pie crust and sometimes topped with a dollop of whipped cream, it transformed an inexpensive dried fruit into something that felt surprisingly refined. For many families, prunes were a pantry staple, cheap, long-lasting, and packed with natural sweetness. Betty Crocker's recipe gave them new life, turning what might have been dismissed as an everyday food into a dessert worthy of the Sunday table. Children might not have loved the idea of prunes, but adults appreciated its lightness compared to richer pies. Prune whip pie was more than just dessert, it was a reflection of its era. It spoke to the resilience of home cooks who could take humble ingredients and elevate them with a little imagination. Today, it's nearly vanished from recipe boxes, but it remains a sweet reminder of a time when desserts didn't need to be extravagant to feel special.